Hello there everyone, my name is David Lutchford and welcome to lesson 14 of my Ancient Greek course, which you can see is titled No Nominative Needed. So what do I mean by that? Well, the fact that I'm trying to get across to you in this lesson is that Ancient Greek sentences do not require a nominative noun or pronoun. That is to say, you don't need to have a nominative noun or pronoun in an Ancient Greek sentence. And if a sentence in Ancient Greek does not have a nominative noun or pronoun, then you will find the subject in the person ending of the verb. So if there is no nominative noun or pronoun, you have to look at the person ending of the verb, because that is exclusively where you will find the subject if there is no nominative noun or pronoun. Now, this idea that no nominative noun or pronoun is needed necessarily in an Ancient Greek sentence may be quite intuitive to some of you, especially if you already know an inflected language. That is to say, a language where the endings of words dictate the meaning rather than the word order. However, I know that many people, especially those learning Ancient Greek as their first inflected language, find this idea difficult. I've taught both Greek and Latin, two inflected languages, to different students. And this is something that it is quite common for students to struggle with at first, okay? So that's why I'm covering this principle. So to some of you this might be easy, but to others it might be very helpful and enlightening. So let's continue. But for now, just note that Ancient Greek sentences do not require a nominative noun or pronoun. And if an Ancient Greek sentence doesn't have a nominative noun or pronoun, then you need to look at the person ending of the verb in order to find the subject. You should be looking at the person ending of the verb in any case, but in cases where there is no nominative noun or pronoun, you have to look at the person ending of the verb in order to find the subject. And now, in light of that fact, you should already know the 6 person endings that are used in the present indicative active of verbs in or. And I would hope that you can already list these 6 different person endings from memory. So if you can, please pause the video and have a go at listing them, either verbally or writing them out from memory. But to recap, we have 6 different person endings used in the present indicative active of verbs in or. And these let us know who is doing the action of the verb. Those of you that have watched my other videos will know that this 1s here stands for first person singular, the 2s stands for second person singular, and so on. Okay? Now, to go through these 6 person endings, you should have had or, ace, a, omen, ete, usin as your 6 person endings, okay? Or, ace, a, omen, ete, usin. And if you know the meaning of first person singular and second person singular and so forth, which you will if you've watched my other videos, then you will know that the ending or is used when I am doing the action. The ending ace is used when you singular are doing the action. That is to say, the ending ace is used to mean you are doing the action when you refers to just one person. The third person singular person ending a means that he, she, or it is doing the action. The first person plural person ending omen is used to mean that we are doing the action. The second person plural person ending ete means that you plural are doing the action. And finally, the third person plural person ending usin means that they are doing the action. And note that usin has what we call a movable nu at the end. And if you watch my other videos, you'll know that this movable nu, is added if the next word begins in a vowel or if the verb appears at the end of the sentence. If a verb ending in usin appears at the end of a sentence, movable nu is typically added. Now, bearing those person endings in mind, let's look at an example to elucidate this fact that no nominative noun or pronoun is needed in an Ancient Greek sentence. And let's do this by looking at a sentence that we know very well at this point, which does in fact feature a nominative noun, okay? And that is the sentence "Ho despotes ton doulon didaske." Now I hope that you can all translate this sentence You should be able to if you've watched my preceding videos. This sentence means the master teaches the slave, or the master is teaching the slave. We know it means that because chodespotes is masculine nominative singular, as indicated by the masculine nominative singular definite article. And then we've got the verb didaske, and this person ending a lets us know that he, she, or it is doing the teaching. But here we have a nominative noun, so we're told who that he, she, or it is. Okay? The nominative noun lets us know that the he in the he, she, it is the master. And therefore we would translate the sentence as the master teaches the slave. And of course we know that the slave is the object, that is to say he's on the receiving end of the action, he's the one being taught, because of the fact that ton is masculine accusative singular. In the future, we'll learn how nouns change their endings, but right now we're using the definite article as a key to know which case the noun that follows it is in. And we're also using it to know whether the noun that follows it is singular or plural. And that's how we know that this sentence means the master teaches the slave. And crucially, everyone, the a person ending on didaske means that he, she, or it teaches or is teaching. But here, because we've got a nominative noun, we know who exactly is doing the teaching. But to illustrate the principle that I'm trying to get across to you in this video, we could come across the sentence ton doulon didaske. That is to say, this is a perfectly acceptable Greek sentence. And given everything that I've told you, how would you translate this sentence? Because you can see we've got ton doulon, which is the slave, and here it's in the accusative singular, which we know from the masculine accusative singular definite article. And then we've just got the verb didaske, which we know means he, she, it teaches, or he, she, it is teaching. But we don't have any nominative noun. And given that these three words are all we have don't have any other context, we have to translate the sentence as he, she, it teaches the slave, or he, she, it is teaching the slave. Because we don't have a nominative noun or pronoun, so we have to just rely on this person ending a to find out who is doing the action. And because we don't have any context, we can only say that he, she, or it is teaching the slave or teaches the slave. Without the context, we don't know whether it's he, she, or it that's doing the teaching. It's probably he or she, because it's quite rare you would have something that you refer to as it doing teaching, but it's at least possible. But anyway, if you were given this sentence in isolation, I would say this is the best way of translating it as he, she, it teaches the slave, or he, she, it is teaching the slave. However, I should note here that it would also be acceptable, if you were given this sentence in isolation in a class, for example, to translate the sentence just as he teaches the slave or she teaches the slave. If you just gave that as the answer, I think most teachers would mark it as correct because it's one of the possibilities. So unless your teacher specifically asks for you to recognise all three possibilities, he, she, or it, most teachers and mark schemes even would be okay with you just saying he teaches the slave or she teaches the slave if you got this sentence in isolation. However, you might think, can we potentially know whether it is he, she, or it that's doing the teaching? And the answer to that is yes, as long as we have some context. So if we look at the next slide, here we have two sentences, okay? And here we have some context. That sentence that we just looked at has some context which will let us know whether to translate it as he, she, or it teaches the slave. So here we have chodespotes toi douloi legei ton doulon didaske. This first sentence should be translated as the master, that is chodespotes. Legei means speaks or is speaking. And then we've got toi douloi. This is the slave in the dative singular, okay? We know that it's dative singular from the definite article, toi. And therefore, the first sentence is the master speaks to the slave, okay? Or is speaking to the slave. And then we've got the same sentence as before as the second sentence. which we translated before as he, she, it teaches the slave. However, here we've just been told the master is speaking to the slave. So now it's not appropriate to say he, she, it teaches the slave, because we can infer from the context that it will be he, namely the master. And therefore we should translate these sentences as follows. The master is speaking to the slave, he is teaching the slave. Or alternatively, the master speaks to the slave, he teaches the slave. Because we have some context, we know whether to say he, she, or it. And in this case, we would say he, because we know the master is going to be the subject. We know that the he, she, it person ending is going to be referring to the master, and so we would say he. So crucially, everyone, in a story, if you had no nominative noun or pronoun, you would be able to tell from the context whether to translate a verb that's in the third person singular as he, she, or it is doing the action. According to the context, you would know whether to put he, she, or it. But if you were given a sentence with a third person singular verb and no nominative noun or pronoun in total isolation, then you should consider all three possibilities, because it could be he, she, or it is doing the action. Now let's illustrate this principle that ancient Greek sentences do not require a nominative noun or pronoun using a sentence with a third person plural verb. Okay, here we have the sentence hoi douloi tous hippos liuusin. And you can see in this sentence, we do have a nominative noun because we have hoi douloi, and we know that the slaves here are nominative plural from the masculine nominative plural definite article hoi. And therefore we do have a nominative noun, okay? We know the slaves are the subject. And therefore, when we look at liuusin, which means they release or they are releasing, this person ending usin lets us know they are doing the action. And here, because we have a nominative noun, we do know exactly who that they is, okay? We know that they refers to the slaves. We know exactly who's doing the action. So we wouldn't put they are doing it here, but we would put exactly who is doing it, since we're told that in the sentence. So we would say, the slaves are releasing tous hippos, the horses, okay? We know the horses are the object and that they're plural from the masculine accusative plural definite article tous. So this would be the slaves release the horses, or the slaves are releasing the horses. And since we've got a nominative noun, this person ending, the third person plural person ending usin, simply confirms that the subject is third person plural. It essentially matches the nature of the nominative noun, which is a group of people from a third person perspective. However, we could come across the sentence tous hippos liuusin, and here the person ending is not matching a nominative noun in the sentence because we have no nominative noun in the sentence. And in fact, in this sentence, tous hippos liuusin, the person ending usin is all we have to go on in order to find the subject. We can only use the person ending there. The person ending doesn't confirm something that we can find elsewhere in the sentence. It's all we have to determine the subject, okay? Because tous hippos is accusative plural, as indicated by that masculine accusative plural definite article. You should definitely know your forms of the definite article by now. I've been banging on about it for long enough. But anyway, because we only have liuusin, meaning they release or they are releasing, and tous hippos, the horses, in the accusative plural, we can only translate the sentence either as they release the horses, or alternatively, they are releasing the horses. But we don't have the specific group of people that are doing it in the sentence. And therefore, we can't be any more specific than saying that they do it. We have to look at this person ending to find out who's doing the action, and that's all we have to go on when we have no nominative noun or pronoun. But if we had some context, then we personally could know who that they is referring to. We would still translate it as they release the horses, even with context, but with context, we as readers might have a better idea of who that they is referring to. So for example, If we came across the two sentences, hoi duloi tus hippus horosin, tus hippus liusin. Here, we've got this tus hippus liusin sentence in some context, okay? We've got one sentence before it, and that'll give us an idea about who's probably doing the action in the verb liusin, who that they is referring to. So if we look at this first sentence, this should be translated as the slaves, namely hoi duloi. We know that they're doing the action from the masculine nominative plural definite article hoi. The slaves, horosin, is they see. We know the contract verb hora'or, here it's in the third person plural, present indicative active. And we know that contraction has taken place here. The circumflex is often a clue that a contraction has taken place. It doesn't always mean that, of course, as I've explained before, but when a contraction takes place, there is usually a circumflex above the resulting vowel or diphthong. And in fact, that is the only time I'm putting the circumflex on vowels in this course, at least for now. Therefore, so far we know it's the slaves, see, and then the object is tus hippus, which is the horses. We know it's the object, and we know it's plural, from the masculine accusative plural definite article tus. And therefore, the first sentence is the slaves see the horses. And then we're told they release the horses. So overall, we've got the slaves see the horses, they release the horses. And therefore, with this context, we can infer that the they is referring to the slaves. So as readers, that gives us a better idea of who that they is referring to, even though it doesn't affect our translation in any way in this case. That is in the case of third person plural verbs. We still say they release the horses, but in context we know who that they is referring to. Okay, let's now look at some more straightforward examples using the other person endings of verbs in or in the present indicative active. Here we have the sentence ten epistolen perro. Now, ten is feminine accusative singular, and so we know that the letter, ten epistolen, is the object and that there is just one letter. And then we've just got the verb perro. Perro is the verb to carry, and because it ends in or, we know that I am doing the action, not me personally, but in our translation, I is the person doing the action. And we don't have any nominative noun or pronoun. And therefore, we can only translate this as I am carrying the letter or I carry the letter. Now you can see, to say this, we don't need any separate word for I, okay? In English, we have a separate word. We have the pronoun I that we need to put in a sentence when we are saying I am doing something. We need to use that word I. Whereas in many inflected languages, they can just put the first person singular person ending on the end of the verb, and that suffices to indicate that I am doing the action. It's enough. You don't need a separate word for I. But I will tell you that there are separate words for I and we and you singular, you plural, etc. in ancient Greek. These pronouns do exist in ancient Greek. There are words for I, you singular, you plural, we, etc. But they are not needed. In ancient Greek, these pronouns are only used for emphasis, when you want to emphasize, for example, that I am doing an action rather than somebody else. But typically, if you want to say I am doing an action, you just use the first person singular person ending, which we know is or for verbs in or in the present indicative active. You don't need a separate word for I. But just so you're aware, there is a separate word, as I said, for I in ancient Greek, and it is egor. Egor. Okay, it gives us words like ego in English, because if you transliterate it, then you get the word ego. So it also gives us other words like egomaniac and so forth. So to show you an example sentence using the first person singular nominative pronoun egor, here we have egor ten epistolen perro. Now I've told you that these pronouns were only used for emphasis. And so one way we could translate this sentence, showing that egor is there for emphasis, is as follows. We could say, I am carrying the letter. And we could put I in italics to emphasize that I am carrying the letter and not anyone else, essentially. Now, the emphasis isn't always that clear when they do use these pronouns in ancient Greek. When I say they, I mean Greek authors, of course. When Greek authors use these pronouns, the emphasis isn't always that clear. You know, it would sound unnatural to put the pronoun in italics every time one of these pronouns is used. But the point remains that you don't actually need this egor. To say I am carrying the letter, you don't need the word egor, meaning I. You can just say pero, which means I carry or I am carrying. And I know that I haven't covered the nominative pronouns yet, so I shall cover those in a future lesson. But for now, my point is that ancient Greek sentences do not require those nominative pronouns or any nominative noun to be grammatically correct. And if you don't have a nominative noun or pronoun in a sentence, you need to find the subject in the person ending. So let's look at examples using the remaining person endings. Here is the sentence toi xenoi leges. Here, toi xenoi, meaning the foreigner or the stranger, is in the dative singular, which we know from toi, the masculine dative singular definite article. And therefore this means either to the foreigner or for the foreigner. But when we look at the verb is leges, from legor, the verb to speak. But here it's leges, and we know that ace is used to mean you singular are doing the action. And therefore we would translate the sentence as you singular are speaking to the foreigner or to the stranger, or alternatively you could just say you singular speak to the foreigner or to the stranger rather than are speaking. We know that present tense verbs can either be translated as does that thing or is doing that thing, okay? You translate it as one of those two depending on the context, but in isolation it could be either. And here we don't have any nominative noun or pronoun, and therefore we have to just rely on this person ending ace, and that's why we translate it as you singular are speaking to the foreigner, because we know that you singular are doing the action from the person ending ace, but we don't know who the you singular is. The context will make it clear who that you singular exactly is, but we would still translate it as you singular. Although, of course, you wouldn't need to actually specify that it's singular if you were translating a story. I've put that there just for clarity's sake, just to be clear. But of course, if you were translating a story, you would just say you are speaking to the foreigner or you speak to the foreigner without putting the S in brackets there. Let's now go on to another example. This one is toploion lambanomen. So, toploion is the ship, and we know that to is either neuter nominative singular or neuter accusative singular. But when we look at the verb, which is lambanomen, lambano is the verb to take, and here it ends in omen. We know that omen is used to mean we are doing the action, or we do the action, and therefore we know that toploion cannot be nominative, okay? Because it wouldn't make any sense to say we, the ship, are taking. It's not possible to take toploion as subject if we are doing the action, The ship can't be the subject if we are the ones doing the action. And therefore toploion has to be accusative. And so we know to translate the sentence as we are taking the ship, or we take the ship. Since we don't have any nominative noun or pronoun, we have to get the subject from this person ending omen alone. Let's look at one final example now, and that is the sentence toi didaskaloi legete. Toi didaskaloi is the phrase the teacher, but here it's in the dative singular, as indicated by the masculine dative singular definite article. And then we've got the verb legor with the person ending ete. We know ete means that you plural are doing the action, or do the action, of course. And therefore, we would translate the sentence as you plural are speaking to the teacher. or you plural speak to the teacher. We don't have any nominative noun or pronoun, and so that's how we have to translate it. But of course, if it were in a story, you would not include this part. You would not include the plural specification. Okay, that's just for clarity's sake. And if we were translating the sentence in a story, the context will make it clear who exactly that you plural refers to. But without any context, we are left in the dark. It's a mystery. But we know to translate the sentence as you plural are speaking to the teacher, getting the subject from this person ending ete. Okay, here is the first exercise that I have created for you to practice using this principle that ancient Greek sentences do not need nominative nouns or pronouns, and if they don't have a nominative noun or a pronoun, then you need to find the subject in the person ending, okay? So in order to translate these sentences, you will have to look at the person endings of the verbs. In the case of number 3, you've got 2 sentences, one of which does have a nominative noun, while the other does not. And the first one should elucidate who exactly is doing the action in the case of the second sentence in number 3, okay? So have a go at these and see what you get. Please pause the video and play it when you're ready to mark your translations. Okay, let's begin by looking at this first sentence, which was tas boas akousin. This should have been translated as they hear the shouts, or they are hearing the shouts, or they listen to the shouts, or they are listening to the shouts. We knew that it meant this because akouo is the verb to hear, or to listen to, but here it ends in ousin, which lets us know that they are doing the action. And here we had the phrase tas boas. Boas is from the noun boer, which means shout, but here it's in the accusative plural as indicated by the feminine accusative plural definite article. And so we knew that the shouts were the object. And that's why we translated it as they hear the shouts. We had no nominative noun or pronoun, and we have no context, so we don't know who that they is. Okay? Let's do number 2. Number 2 was toi douloi legomen. This should have been translated as we are speaking to the slave, or we speak to the slave. We need to translate it in this way because legomen is from the verb legor, which is the verb to speak, but here it ends in omen, which means that we are doing the action. We didn't have any nominative noun or pronoun, so we couldn't specify further than that who is doing the action. And so we just had to say we speak or we are speaking, and then we had the slave in the dative case, as indicated by the masculine dative singular definite article toi. We are speaking to the slave. Thirdly, we had this one, which has 2 sentences. Okay, 2 sentences for the price of 1. But the price of 1 is free, okay, because these videos are free, and therefore you would ordinarily just get 1 sentence for free, but here you've got 2 sentences for free. I don't know. Honestly, let's get on to these sentences, please. Number 3 consisted of 2 sentences, the first of which was ho despotes ton doulon horai. The second was toi douloi lege. You should have translated these 2 sentences as the master sees the slave, he speaks to the slave. We knew that it meant this because the master was in the nominative at the start of the sentence. We did have a nominative noun in that first sentence, namely the master. And then we had this third person singular verb, horai. But here we know who's doing that third person singular verb. We know who the he in the he, she, it is. We know that it's the master. So the master sees the slave. And we knew that the slave was both singular and the object from the masculine accusative singular definite article. Then we had toi douloi lege. Now in the second sentence, lege means he, she, it speaks or is speaking, and then toi douloi is the slave in the dative, meaning to the slave, as indicated by the masculine dative singular definite article. But here we know, in the case of lege, who exactly is doing the speaking out of the he, she, or it. We know from the context that it's going to be the master. And so we would say, he speaks to the slave, because we know that it's going to be him in all probability, given that he's just seen the slave. So it's the master sees the slave, he speaks to the slave. Number 4 was the sentence, ten epistolean grapho. Grapho is the verb to write, but here it ends in or, which means that I am doing the action. And then ten is feminine accusative singular, and so we know that the letter is the object, and that there's just one letter, okay? And therefore, we would translate the sentence as, I am writing the letter, or I write the letter. Remember, we don't need any separate word for I. If there were a separate word for I, then it would just be for emphasis. Finally, number 5 was tous hippus luei. We know that luo is the verb to release, but here it ends in a. And we don't have any nominative noun or pronoun. So here, in isolation, we need to say, he, she, it releases the horses. You could have said, he releases the horses, or she releases the horses. As I said, those are acceptable translations as well. But I do like to list all of the possibilities when you're given a sentence without any context. But if you put, he releases the horses, or she releases the horses, that's also fine. But without any context, we can't be sure, and so I've listed all of the possibilities. He, she, it releases the horses, or he, she, it is releasing the horses. We knew that the horses were the object from the masculine accusative plural definite article. Okay, I now have a second exercise for you, and this next exercise is going to be using contract verbs throughout. I know you've already had one already, you've already had horao being used, but this next exercise will use more contract verbs, okay? So please make sure you know either the table of contraction, which I taught in a previous lesson and which I'm currently displaying on the screen, or that you know the present indicative active conjugations of different paradigm contract verbs like hora or poye or etc. in order to know how the person endings contract with the vowels at the end of the stems of these verbs. And the way I did this was by learning the table of contraction, which I've put on the screen. This is my handwritten version of the table of contraction, but for those of you that would prefer to learn from a typed version, here is the Excel spreadsheet edition of that same table. Okay, so you can pause it on whichever of these you prefer and learn it if you haven't already. But if you've been watching my videos, you should already know either that or the different paradigmatic conjugations. And there's one more thing before we look at exercise 2, and that is I'm introducing you to a new noun. Very soon I will do a video covering the vocabulary that I've already used in the prior videos, so that it's all in one place. And also, after I cover how nouns change their endings, we shall start categorizing these nouns, which will make it easier to remember them. But for now, let me tell you that the noun kora means land or country. And you can see that it is a feminine noun from her, which is the feminine nominative singular definite article. Okay, that lets you know that the noun is feminine. So kora means land or country. Keep an eye out for it in the next exercise. And here is that very exercise. Exercise 2, which uses contract verbs and in one of the sentences also uses the noun kora, but it may not be in the nominative case, okay? So make sure you check the definite article before it to work out the case and number of the noun. But have a go at these 5 sentences. Once again, these are sentences which prompt you to practice finding the subject in the person ending of the verb. And I can tell you for a fact that there are no nominative nouns or pronouns in these sentences, okay? So bear that in mind as you translate. You will have to find the subject in the person ending of the verb in each instance. Pause the video, have a go, and then check your answers. Okay, let's now go through these sentences. Number 1 was ta ploja zderte. Zderte is from the verb zderte or. Here it's got the person ending a, which is contracted with the epsilon at the end of the verb stem, but it's resulted in the same diphthong, which is handy. And therefore, we would translate the sentence as he, she, it is looking for the ships. Or he, she, it looks for the ships. Or seeks the ships, or is seeking the ships. You could say any of those, okay? And if you just put he is looking for the ships, or she is looking for the ships, that is also fine, but I like to list all of the possibilities. Because, without any context, we can't know whether it's he, she, or it that's doing the action. We knew it was the ships because of the neuter accusative plural definite article. We can't take taploia as nominative here because it wouldn't make any sense. Although the verb would be singular, because taploia would require a schnurb, that is to say, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that term, a verb that is singular because it has a neuter plural subject. But, although taploia could hypothetically be nominative, when we try to translate it as nominative, we realise that it can't be in this particular instance, okay? Although it could in principle, it can't be here because it wouldn't make any sense to say the ships are looking for or the ships are seeking. But it does make sense to say he, she, or it is looking for the ships. So the ships were in the accusative plural. Let's do number 2. Ton didaskalon doulousin. Doulo'o is the verb to enslave. Here, the o has contracted with the person ending ousin, and it's resulted in the same person ending, so another lucky case here, okay? And therefore, we should have translated this sentence as they are enslaving the teacher, or they enslave the teacher. The poor teacher is being enslaved for some reason, I don't know why. But, alas, that is how we are to translate this sentence. They are enslaving the teacher, or they enslave the teacher. We knew that the teacher was the object and singular from the masculine accusative singular definite article ton. We had no nominative noun or pronoun in the sentence, and so we couldn't possibly know anything about who that they is referring to. Number 3 was tous hippus horror. We had no nominative noun or pronoun once again, so we had to look at the person ending with the verb, which was or. This is from the verb horraor, but the alpha and the omega have contracted just to produce omega on its own. So, because it ends in omega, because it used that person ending omega, we know that it means I am doing the action, and therefore we will translate this as I see the horses. We knew the horses were the object because of the masculine accusative plural definite article. 4 was tei korei ten epistolen derlois. This one was a bit trickier. It used the verb derlo'or, an omicron contract verb, and here the stem derlo has contracted with the person ending ace. That is, my handwriting is not the best when I'm writing on PowerPoint with the mouse, okay? Please forgive me. But if you have or plus ace, it makes ois, okay? If you used your table of contraction, you would have realised that. Or if you've learned the paradigms, you would have known that. And therefore, this ois, which is omicron contracted with ace, lets us know that you singular are doing the action, okay? And the verb here is der lo'or, the verb to show, and therefore we would translate the sentence as you singular are showing the letter to the girl. Or you singular show the letter to the girl. We knew that the letter was the direct object from the feminine accusative singular definite article, and we knew that the girl was the indirect object. We had to say to the girl because of the fact that the girl is in the dative singular as indicated by the feminine dative singular definite article. The letter was accusative, the girl was dative, and that's why we said to the girl, because she was in the dative case, which we learned about in the last video. Let's finish this exercise with number 5, which is ten koran nikosin. Nikao is the verb to conquer or to defeat. And this ending orsin that it has is alpha contracted with usin. Because alpha plus u makes or, as you will know if you've learned your table of contraction. and therefore this is a third person plural person ending. This is actually usin, but usin contracted with alpha. And so we would translate the sentence as they are conquering the land, or they conquer the land, or they are conquering the country, or they conquer the country, because we learned that noun kora means land or country. And now you might have noticed that I put a macron above the alpha in the noun kora when I introduced it to let you know that it's a long alpha. I'm only including these macra, that is the lines indicating when a vowel is long, when I'm introducing a new item of vocabulary, okay? And I'll pronounce it as a long vowel. So for instance, nikosin has a long iota here, okay? That's why I say ni rather than ni. But I'm just pointing out that I'll only put these on, the vowels, from this point on, when I'm first introducing them, okay? Because you wouldn't see them in a Greek text. You wouldn't see macra above vowels in a Greek text. But anyway, you had these 5 sentences, and in each case you had to find the subject in the person ending, and I hope that you did well. Or if you didn't, I hope that you realised what you did wrong. And in general, I hope that you're getting the idea that when you don't have a nominative noun or pronoun, you need to find the subject in the person ending of the verb. Because ancient Greek sentences do not necessarily need a nominative noun or pronoun. Okay, I've got a third exercise prepared for you now. This lesson is just full of exercises, you know, it's full of that good practice that you need. But before exercise 3, I want to introduce you to some new nouns, okay? The first of which is biblion. Biblion is a neuter noun, which you can tell from the to following it. Biblion means book. Okay, a biblion is a book. And in particular, technically, it's a little book, okay, because that ion suffix is a diminutive suffix. That is to say, it makes the word a little version of the original word. The ion part makes it a smaller version of the original word. I know I've spoken about these before because I've already given you the noun paidion. A paidion is a little child, from the noun pais, meaning child. Here we have biblion, which comes from biblos. Biblos is a book. Biblion is technically a little book, but biblion is also used to mean book in general. Although it's technically a diminutive, it is used to mean book in general, just a book. The second word I want you to meet is xipos. Xipos means sword, okay? A xipos is a sword. And you can see from the to that xipos is also a neuter noun. Now I think that many, if not all, of the neuter nouns that I've shown you up to this point have ended in on. Omicron new in the nominative singular. So for example, ploion ends in on, so does paidion. Paidion also ends in on, and so does biblion. But xipos ends in os. And that is because it belongs to a different group of neuter nouns, which we'll talk about much more in the future, okay? Whereas the others that end in omicron new all belong to the same group as each other, but xipos is in a different group. However, it is still a neuter noun. But we'll learn more about those groups and how nouns change their endings in the future. But there are 2 reasons why I'm making a big deal of this right now. The first is, every neuter noun you've seen to this point, or at least many of them, have ended in on, whereas this one ends in os. And moreover, the second reason is every noun that you've seen ending in os, omicron sigma, up to this point, has been a masculine noun. So for example, doulos is masculine. It ends in os and it's masculine. But not every noun that ends in os is masculine, okay? Xipos is neuter. And that's why you have to learn each noun's gender individually. But once you've learned about the groups that nouns belong to, which we call declensions, that will also help you to learn which gender a noun is much more quickly, because there are patterns depending on which group a noun belongs to. But for now, know that xipos means sword and is a neuter noun. And as a fun fact for you, okay, let me give you some derivatives from these nouns. That is to say, words we get from these nouns. The first one, biblion, meaning book, gives us the word Bible. The word Bible comes from the nominative plural form of biblion, which is biblia, meaning books. And if we transliterated this word, biblia, we would get biblia, which is where we get Bible from, because the Bible is a collection of different books. Now, with regard to xipos, meaning sword, I don't know of any obvious derivatives, okay? If you know of one, then please do post it in the comments. But one that I found, which is not in common usage, but you might be interested to know, is this creature here on the screen is called a swordfish, right? And the scientific name for a swordfish, that is to say the Latin name for a swordfish, is a Xiphias gladius, which literally means a swordfish sword, because Xiphias is the Latin transliteration of the Greek word xiphias, which means swordfish, and that word xiphias itself comes from xipos, meaning sword. So the first word in the scientific or Latin name for a swordfish ultimately comes from the Greek word for a sword. Okay, it comes from that word xipos. If you're wondering about the second word in the Latin name for a swordfish, the second word, gladius, is the Latin word meaning sword, okay? So it's quite weird that a swordfish is called a swordfish sword in Latin, but that is its name, okay? It's called a swordfish sword. I know that's not a common derivative, but it might interest you. But anyway, let's move on from swordfish, and please do remember that xipos itself means sword and not swordfish, okay? So if you see that word, please do not translate it as swordfish, but translate it as sword. Now, on the screen we have exercise 3, which consists of 5 Greek sentences for you to translate. These use a mixture of contract and regular verbs, okay? All of them require you to find the subject in the person ending of the verb. So you won't find a nominative noun or pronoun in these sentences. You need to look at the person ending of the verb. And you will find those 2 new nouns, biblion meaning book and xipos meaning sword, within these sentences. Okay, so keep an eye out for those and ensure that you look at the definite article before those nouns to make sure that you know the case and number of those nouns. So pause the video and have a go at translating these 5 sentences. Let's now talk through these, starting with number 1. Number 1 is ton tu xenu hippon toi despotei delor. This should have been translated as, I show the foreigner's horse to the master. You could have said, I am showing the foreigner's horse to the master. We knew that it meant this because the verb here was delor at the end, okay? This is from the verb delor, which is the verb to show. But the omicron at the end of the stem has contracted with omega to make omega, which is handy. It's the same person ending as it usually is, just with a circumflex above it. So that lets us know that it means I show, or I am showing. And then we've got ton going with hippon. Okay, so the horse is in the accusative, which we know from the masculine accusative singular definite article. And you should have spotted that here we have 2 definite articles next to each other. We've got ton and tu. And we haven't got any repeated definite article. And so what we're dealing with here is a genitive sandwich, okay? Because tu is masculine genitive singular, going with xenu, and ton is going with hippon. So these 2 are going together, and tu xenu has been sandwiched in the middle. So this means I show the horse of the foreigner, literally, or of the stranger. You could have said stranger in your translation as well. To the master. We know it's to the master because the master's in the dative case as indicated by the masculine dative singular definite article. Number 2 was toi xenoi toploion poies. This should have been translated as, you are making the ship for the foreigner. Or, alternatively, you could say you make the ship for the foreigner, you are making the ship for the stranger, or you make the ship for the stranger, because xenos can mean either stranger or foreigner, and present tense verbs can either be translated as does that thing or is doing that thing. We knew that it meant this because we had no nominative noun or pronoun, and therefore we had to find the subject in the person ending, which in this case was ace. Helpfully, it's the same person ending because here ace is contracted with the epsilon at the end of the stem of the verb poiet or. The stem ends in e, and that is contracted with ace to make ace, the same person ending, apart from the circumflex, which is new. But anyway, from the ace, we know that it's you singular make or you singular are making. And then at the start we had this dative phrase, toi xenoi. And since the foreigner there is in the dative, we know that it means to the foreigner or for the foreigner. But because the action is making, you can't be making something to someone. We would say for somebody in English. So therefore, it's you are making for the foreigner, and then we had the ship in the middle. And this had to be in the accusative. It's not possible in this sentence for it to be nominative, given that you are doing the action, okay? The ship is not doing the action, you are doing the action. And I highly doubt that you is a ship, okay? So the ship is accusative here. Although in principle, top loyon could be either nominative or accusative. Here it's accusative. So you are making the ship for the foreigner. I know that for the foreigner, toi xenoi, comes first in the Greek sentence, but in English we would have to reword it and make it sound nice and natural and say you are making the ship for the foreigner, because you can't say you are making for the foreigner the ship. You always want to make your translations sound natural in English. Number 3 was toxipos totu despotu echeis. Echor is the verb to have or to hold. Here it ends in ace, and so we know that you singular are doing it, and therefore this sentence should have been translated as you singular are holding the master's sword, or you singular have the master's sword. It could be either, okay, because echor can mean either have or hold. You could have also had you singular hold the master's sword rather than are holding, of course. We knew it was you singular are doing it from the ace person ending. This was a regular verb, not a contract verb. And then we had toxipos, that new noun, okay, in the accusative. It looks identical to the nominative, but here it's got to be accusative. It wouldn't make any sense for it to be nominative. So you are holding the sword, and then we have to again, with tu, another definite article, following it. So we've got two definite articles next to each other, and here, one of the definite articles, namely to, is a repeated definite article. In particular, it was here earlier in the sentence, okay? Going with xipos. So this second to is specifying something about xipos. It's what we call the repeated article construction, which I cover in my video on the genitive case. So literally this says, you are holding the sword, the one of the master, because the master is in the genitive as indicated by the masculine genitive singular definite article. But we would translate that more nicely as you are holding the master's sword. You could say you are holding the sword of the master. That would also be fine. But ideally, we want to make it sound natural and use apostrophe S. Okay? Brilliant. Let's go on to number 4. Number 4 was tous hippus tais chorais sderteite. This was a contract verb at the end, and this sentence should have been translated as you plural are looking for the horses for the girls. You could have said you plural seek or are seeking the horses for the girls as well, because sderte or means either to look for or to seek. Here we had sderte or, and what's happened here is the epsilon in the stem of sderte or has contracted with the person ending ete, which is the second person plural person ending, and that has made eite. Okay, so this ending eite is second person plural. And that lets us know that you plural are doing the action, you plural are looking for or are seeking. Then we had the horses at the start in the accusative case and in the plural. We know that from the masculine accusative plural definite article. the horses, and then we had tais korais, which means for the girls. It's the girls in the dative case and in the plural, okay? We know that it's dative and plural from the feminine dative plural definite article, tais. So it could mean to the girls or for the girls, out of context. But in context, we need to say for the girls rather than to the girls, because you can't say you are looking for the horses to the girls. You need to say for the girls. Finally, number 5 was toi didaskaloi ta biblia peromen. This should have been translated as we carry the books for the teacher. The verb was at the end. Peromen is from the verb peror, but here it ends in omen, which means we are doing it or we do it. So you could say we carry or we are carrying. We had the direct object, the accusative in the middle, ta biblia, and I hope you got that it was in the plural. Okay, this new noun biblion was in the plural here, as indicated by the neuter accusative plural definite article ta, which is visually identical to the neuter nominative plural form of the definite article, but it can't be nominative here. It wouldn't make any sense. So we've got to understand that it's accusative. So far we've got we carry the books, and at the start we had toi didaskaloi, which is the teacher in the dative case as indicated by toi, the masculine dative singular form of the definite article. And therefore we know that this phrase means either to the teacher or for the teacher, and given the context and given the fact that the dative isn't typically used to express motion towards something, it doesn't typically get used to mean to in the sense of towards. In light of those two facts, it's more probably we carry the books for the teacher. But the dative does occasionally get used to mean to in the sense of towards, but just not typically. Okay, before exercise 4, I would like to remind you that I have also introduced you to the 6 forms of didormi in the present indicative active. And I would hope that you remember these different forms of didormi. This is the only verb that ends in me, the only me verb that I have introduced so far, because I'll cover those at a later stage in more depth. But didormi is a very important one because it's the verb to give. And I hope you remember that it goes didormi, meaning I give, then didors, meaning you singular give, and then didorsin, meaning he, she, it gives. And after that, it goes didomen, meaning we give, didorter, meaning you plural give, and didoarsin, meaning they give. So it goes didormi, didors, didorsin, didomen, didorter, didoarsin. And I'll expect you to know these forms in exercise 4, which requires you to translate 3 sentences where there is no nominative noun or pronoun to be found. And so in these sentences, you have to look at the person ending of the verb, and that verb in these 3 sentences happens to be didormi. Okay, so look at the form of didormi that's used in order to tell who is doing the action. Pause the video and have a go at these 3 sentences, looking at the form of didormi that's used to find the subject. Okay, the first of these was toi, douloi, to biblion, didorsin. Didorsin is the third person singular present indicative active form of didormi, and so we know that this means he, she or it gives the book to the slave. The book, to biblion, was in the accusative. We know it's in the accusative because although it's visually identical to the nominative, it wouldn't make any sense for it to be in the nominative here. It's got to be the object rather than the subject. So he, she, it gives the book to the slave. The slave was in the dative singular, which we know from toi, the masculine dative singular form of the definite article. Number 2 was toxipos toi despotei didormi. Didormi is the first person singular form of didormi in the present indicative active, and so you should have got I give the sword to the master, or I am giving the sword to the master. The sword was in the accusative. It doesn't make any sense for it to be in the nominative here. And then toi despotei was the master, but in the dative case as indicated by the definite article. And finally, Number 3 was tas epistolas tais chorais didoasin. Here, looking at didoasin, this was the third person plural present indicative active form of didomi, which is the they form, and therefore you should have translated this sentence as they give the letters to the girls. The letters were at the start, tas epistolas. We know that it's the letters and that they are the object because of the feminine accusative plural definite article, and we knew that tais chorais meant to the girls because of the fact that tais is feminine dative plural. Okay, I've got just one more exercise for you today, but before showing you that exercise, I want to show you some more new nouns. How exciting is this? It's like your birthday, you know, it's amazing. So let's go and look at the first of these nouns. The first one is anthropos, which means man. And you can see that it's masculine because of the ho. There is a feminine form of this noun as well, but for now, when you see anthropos, it will be masculine. And it means man. And now it doesn't mean man in the sense of a male. It means man in the general sense, like in the word mankind. This word anthropos means man in that general sense. You can think of it as meaning man in contrast to the gods, or in contrast to wild beasts. There's the gods, there's the wild beasts, and there's man. So an anthropos is a man in the sense of a human. And we do get an actually popular derivative from this word anthropos, meaning man. And you might be able to guess what it is. If you've watched my transliteration video, then transliterate this word and see if you can figure out a derivative. Okay, pause the video and have a go. You might be able to transliterate it just in your head and think of a derivative, because I shall now reveal that if we transliterate the word, then we get the word anthropos, which gives us words like anthropology. Anthropology is the study of humanity, or you could think of it literally as the study of man. The ology part lets us know that it's the study of something. That suffix ology denotes the study of something, itself coming from Greek. In particular, it comes from the Greek suffix logia, which denoted a study of something in ancient Greek. So ology means study of, and the anthrop part comes from anthropos, which means man. So literally, anthropology is the study of man in the broad sense of the word man, in the sense of humans. So anthropology is the study of humans. And there are different types of anthropology. You get biological anthropology, focusing on the biological development of humans. And you also get cultural anthropology, which is the study of different human cultures, amongst other types of anthropology. Now let me introduce you to one more noun, and that is the noun stratos. Stratos is a masculine noun, which we know from the ho, and it means army. A stratos is an army. You might be able to come up with a derivative here. If you transliterate it, think of similar English words. But please note that a word being similar does not guarantee that it has come from a Greek word, okay? Sometimes the similarity can be misleading. But anyway, stratos means army, and there is a nice photo of an army as a visual representation. And if we transliterate it, we get stratos, and one word we get from this is strategy. Strategy ultimately goes back to stratos, meaning army. That strat part goes back to stratos. I forgot to roll my R there. My rolled R is very emphatic, I know. But anyway, strategy goes back to stratos, because strategy used to refer to the skill of leading an army, but it came to be used more widely than that. And that's why the strat part is there, because it used to be about leading an army, or the art of leading an army, or being a general. These might help you to remember the meanings of these words, but let's go on to the fifth and final exercise, okay? And now this is like the final boss of this lesson, okay? Because these 5 sentences are a mixture of sentences that don't have a nominative noun or pronoun and sentences that do have a nominative noun, okay? So you have to look out for whether a sentence has a nominative noun when you're translating it. So determine whether it's got a nominative noun. If it does, great, you know exactly who's doing the action, but if it doesn't, you need to find the subject in the person ending of the verb. So have a go at translating these 5 sentences. Please pause the video and good luck. Let's now talk through these sentences one by one to conclude the lesson. The first was ton hipon toi despotei liuo. You should have translated this sentence as I am releasing the horse for the master, or alternatively, I release the horse for the master. Now, why did it mean that? Well, we had no noun in the nominative. This phrase, ton hipon, is in the accusative. We know that from the masculine accusative singular definite article here. And this phrase, toi despotei, is in the dative, which we know from the masculine dative singular definite article. And the verb at the end, liuo, had the person ending or, which means that I am doing the action. So this means I am releasing. The horse was in the accusative, so I am releasing the horse, and then it was either for the master or to the master. I am releasing the horse for the master. Number 2 was tas epistolas toi despotei didoasin hoiduloi. Now you had to look carefully here, ladies and gentlemen, because you did in fact have a nominative noun. At the end, you had this phrase hoiduloi, and hoi is masculine nominative plural. So that lets you know that the slaves are the subject. And you should have translated this sentence as the slaves give the letters to the master, or the slaves are giving the letters to the master. This was because we had the slaves in the masculine nominative plural here, and we had the verb didoasin, which means they give. But here we've been told who that they refers to, namely the slaves. We've been told exactly who the subject is. So we don't translate it just as they here, but we translate it as the slaves give rather than they give. So here we would say the slaves give. Tas epistolas was the letters in the accusative plural, as indicated by the definite article, and then you had to the master, because this is the dative singular version of the phrase the master, as indicated by the definite article. Let's now go on to number 3. Number 3 was to paidion to xenu ploion horai. There are actually 2 different acceptable translations of this sentence. I'm going to explain one of them now, and then I shall explain the other one afterwards. This was a tricky sentence, okay? Because you had 2 neuter nouns and you had a genitive sandwich. And one of the neuter nouns was in the nominative, okay? Because it wouldn't make sense for the first of these neuter nouns to be in the accusative. And you should have translated it as the little child sees the foreigner's ship. We had topaidion at the start, the little child. Horai was the verb, which is he, she, or it sees. Here, we know exactly who that he, she, or it is. We know that it's the little child because topaidion is in the nominative. So it's the little child sees. And then we had to xenu ploion. To here was going with ploion, okay? We had 2 definite articles next to each other, to and tu. We had no repeated definite articles, so we know that this is a genitive sandwich. So to is going with ploion, and tu xenu is a genitive phrase that's been sandwiched in the middle. So literally, this was the little child sees the ship, doing that part first, the ship of the foreigner, or of the stranger. And then we can make that sound nicer by saying the foreigner's ship. So the little child sees the foreigner's ship, or the little child sees the stranger's ship. Now I did say that there's an alternative way of translating this sentence. And we can see this alternative way of translating the sentence by realising that the second to could be taken as a repeated definite article. I said just before now that there is no repeated definite article. Now that's on one reading, okay? On the reading I've just given, I have taken to, the second to, as going with ploion, rather than it being a repeated version of the first to. However, grammatically, it is possible for that second to be a repeated definite article, in which case ploion would just be missing a definite article, which is possible. And if we read the sentence this way, if we read that second to as being a repeated definite article, then the phrase to paidion to tou xenu would be translated as the little child of the foreigner, or the foreigner's little child. And then, overall, you would translate the sentence as the foreigner's little child sees a ship. Because ploion wouldn't have a definite article there, we would probably say a ship. However, when we've been translating sentences, every noun in the course so far has had a definite article going with it. And so I expect that you will have translated it in the first of these two ways. However, I just wanted to make it clear that it is possible to read the sentence in this alternative way. It all depends on whether you take the second to as going with ploion or as being a repeated definite article. Number 4 was a short one, and it was tous anthropous du lumen. You had your new noun here, okay? I hope you remembered it. And this should have been translated as we are enslaving the men. The reason we translated it this way is because there was no nominative noun here. We just had tous anthropous, which is accusative plural, as indicated by the masculine accusative plural definite article, and a verb. And the verb was doulumen, from the verb douloor, which is the verb to enslave. Here it ended in umen, because the o and omen have contracted to make umen. Okay? So it's we enslave, or we are enslaving the men. First, the teacher was being enslaved, and now men are being enslaved. This is a sad situation, really. Anyway, since we had no nominative noun, we had to look at that person ending umen and realise that it was first person plural, we are doing the action. Finally, number 5 was ton straton nikate. This should have been translated as you plural are defeating the army. We knew that it meant this because nikate is from the verb nikaor, which is to conquer or to defeat. And the ending ate is second person plural, and we know that because the alpha in the stem of nikaor has contracted with the ending ete to make ate. Okay, it's contracted with that second person plural ending. So this ending ate is itself second person plural. So we know that it's you plural defeat or are defeating, and then we had ton straton. We know that a stratos is an army, but here it was preceded by ton, and ton is masculine accusative singular. So we know that there's just one army and that the army is the object. So this sentence says you plural defeat or are defeating the army. I would say defeating sounds more natural than conquering in this context, because conquering is more about land, I think. But anyway, that finishes the lesson for today. I hope that you enjoyed it, I hope that you found it informative, and I hope that I have got across the idea that if there is no nominative noun or pronoun in an ancient Greek sentence, then you need to look at the person ending of the verb to find out who is doing the action, okay? Because in ancient Greek, you don't necessarily need a nominative noun or pronoun. So bear that in mind when you're translating in the future. But for now, it's time for me to say goodbye, and I shall see you again in the next lesson.